Hello, my name is Lucé Tomlin-Brenner, and I am the writer and director of the upcoming horror comedy Surprise. And today I am co-hosting the final Girlboss, a roundtable with Emma Cogan from Monstrous Femme Films, featuring several incredible feminist filmmakers, critics, and comedians. And we're going to talk about the delightfully toxic trope that is girlbossism in genre film. So, I put this together because I've been fascinated by the rise of the girl boss in the last several years in film and in real life. And Surprise is about a group of 4 girlfriends who are obsessed with positivity. They are very toxic. And their whole worldview gets shattered when they accidentally witness a murder. So to help roll out the excitement, I'm going to get this conversation going, and I want to hear from everybody and what you guys think about girlbossism and what kinds of strong female characters you would rather be seeing in your films. So without further ado, let me just give you a taste of who you're going to see today. Filmmaker and film theorist BJ Colangelo, actor and filmmaker Devan Gallagher, comedian and host Vanessa Guerrero, freelance journalist, filmmaker, and creator of all things radical in media, Monika, Estrella, Negra, film critic and culture critic Chauncy K and last but not least, Mariam Bastani, whose bio that I give in the following video was outdated, so I'm going to give you the updated one now. Mariam is absolutely amazing. I'm so excited she was here today. She's based in Toronto. She's the operations coordinator at Morgue magazine. She's the co-founder of the queer, trans, intersex, Black, Indigenous, people of color focused Audre's Revenge film, which is an incredible group of horror creators. Mariam has curated Canadian, US, and international horror screenings, and she was the editor-in-chief of Maximum Rock and Roll magazine. She's been on all kinds of academic speaking tours regarding people of color in punk culture, and she has been on several women in horror panels. So you're going to get a little bit more about all of our roundtable guests, and you'll get a full discussion coming up. Just stay tuned. And if you want to learn more about Surprise or contribute to getting us funded, you can go to the link in my socials, LTB Comedy on Twitter and Instagram, or just go to seedandspark.com/fund/surprisegirlboss. Thanks so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoy our conversation on the final girl boss. All right, hello, and welcome to the final Girl Boss Roundtable with my favorite selection of female filmmakers and film critics and writers and thinkers and funny people. I'm Lucé Tomlin-Brenner, and I'm joined by my co-host,
Emma Cogan. Hi, nice to see you guys.
I'm a filmmaker and comedian and podcaster and multidisciplinary artist, I guess. And Emma and I are working together on our next short film, which is called Surprise, and is about a bunch of girl bosses who accidentally witness a murder, and it challenges their super positive perspective on life. So that's what prompted all of us wanting to get together here, because Emma and I are really frustrated with especially the recent rash of pseudo-feminist portrayals in genre film and Oscar-nominated film, and we are challenging that with this short. It's a satire on the basically white capitalist feminism portrayal of women, of feminism. So Emma, do you want to introduce yourself and talk about that a little bit?
Hey guys, I am Emma Cogan. I'm a filmmaker, costume designer, and I'm also the co-founder of the feminist horror collective Monstrous Femme Films. And, genre film is something that's really important to me and my whole personality trait. So, having proper representation, having conversations like this where we're questioning and challenging narratives how we feel like we are portrayed on screen is really important to me. And so I'm really excited to be joined by all of you today.
Terrific. Well, I'm going to start. I'm going to introduce everybody, and then feel free if you guys want to jump in and say anything else. I'm just going to read these off based on the order that I received them in. So today we are joined by Chauncy K. Robinson, aka Twisted CKR. She's a film critic and a culture critic, and she uses her reviews and journalism to dig into the guts of art and entertainment, exploring their connection to society as a whole. Chauncy, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Do you prefer Chauncy or do you prefer CKR?
Chauncey's fine. I like my name too. So.
It's such a cool name. You're the first Chauncy I've ever met. I'm so excited. All right, Chauncy uses she, her pronouns. And next up, we're joined by BJ Colangelo.
Yes, you got it.
Hello. BJ is a fat femme queer filmmaker, film theorist, co-host of the podcast This Ends at Prom, and she uses she, her pronouns. BJ, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, really excited to have you and your whole Beetlejuice vibe that you have going on.
Thank you. I just get Beetlejuice anytime I wear black and white. Comes with the territory of green hair.
Yeah.
It's my all-time favorite movie, so I also see it places where it's not necessarily. Next up, we have Devan Gallagher, who also uses she, her pronouns. She is a New York-based actor and award-winning filmmaker with a passion for diverse representation and storytelling. She's appeared in film, on television, and on stage in New York City. And she's the writer and director of Zed Sty, a award-winning comedic horror short that brought zombies to Brooklyn and earned praise for its sharp commentary and fresh take on the genre. Devan is a judge for the Women in Horror Film Festival, and she talks frequently about women in film, horror, sci-fi, and ADHD. Devan, welcome.
Hey, you got that right. That was awesome.
Hell yeah. Well, Monika and Devan and I met at the Axe Moon Film Festival in 2018, where I got to see your incredible shorts. And I loved Zed Sty. It was a fantastic zombie take on gentrification.
Thanks.
Next up, we have Vanessa Guerrero. Did I pronounce that right? Okay, yeah. Terrific. So many of you are my online friends that I never see in person. So I just...
This is the closest we can get right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really special. So Vanessa Guerrero uses she, her pronouns, and she's the host of Kicking and Screaming podcast. And she's soon going to be hosting a horror tabletop game over at Fandom Tabletop on Twitch. That sounds so cool.
Yeah, I've been really wanting to do something that just lets people be playful, because I think as adults we don't get to play as much as we'd like to, and tabletop is such a beautiful way to get a lot of these like horror stories that we want to tell out, so I'm very excited.
Oh, absolutely. I feel like when we do enjoy playing, we're like, how can we monetize this?
Exactly.
And then we ruin it.
Yeah, it has to be part of our career, and we have to make financial income from our fun times as adults.
Exactly. It has to be part of the hustle forever. So
yeah,
anything that I can do to make adults be goofy.
Amazing. All right. Well, up next we have Monika Estrella Negra, a filmmaker, writer, editor, and co-founder of Audre's Revenge Film. She's the editor of Decoded Pride, a queer speculative literature anthology, and she's currently working on her fourth short, Bitten, a Tragedy. Hello, Monika.
Hello, everybody. How's it going?
And your new issue just came out of Decoded, right?
It's coming out soon. We just announced all of our participating authors, so it's very exciting. It's going to come out during Pride Month in June.
That's awesome. And you're on Instagram, so we'll make sure to tag all that too so everybody can find it. Congrats. I'm really excited about reading that.
Thank you.
And then, yeah, of course. Next, we have another co-founder of Audre's Revenge Film, Mariam, online Mariam, you go by Mariam B. Do you want to use your last name or no?
Yeah, Mariam Bastani. Okay.
Mariam Bastani. Okay, hello. And Mariam loves playing loud hardcore, doing punk stuff, and all things horror. As a writer, she explores the intersections of ethnicity, color, gender fucking in punk and horror. Miriam studied theology and religious studies, which she often applies to her horror lens, and believes that horror and sci-fi are true mediums for the queer BIPOC folks to thrive. Agreed. Perfectly put.
Yikes.
All right. Well, to kick things off, I just want to throw out there and see if you guys are familiar with the girl boss trope. Is it something that you think about at all, or you care about at all? What are your girl boss thoughts?
I make fun of it a lot. I don't know. I feel like it's such a good topic to just, shit post about on Twitter and antagonize people who are completely unconscious of the fact that they are perpetuating the same weaponization of white feminist rhetoric through capitalist means. And I think, there's definitely been a trend of it, and I think it's, I'm trying to figure out what Ground Zero was, besides that Netflix show. What was it? It was an actual Netflix show called Girlboss, which was created by, So I think, she's, the prototype, I guess, but I think that's, always existed to a certain extent, with second wave feminism, etc. But what was?
Sheryl Sanders, was that her name, who created Lean In?
Sheryl Sandberg.
Sanders is the chicken.
Also, Sophia Amoroso, right? Is that who you're talking about?
Yeah, the girl
Nasty Gal.
Nasty Gal.
Yep.
Who's such a good example of being the first girl boss that has the word girl boss associated with her.
Yeah.
Because she was exalted for creating this career from the ground up, so to speak. But then the second you even take a little bit of a look underneath the surface, toxic business practices, racial bias, and insane company turnover, just scratching a little bit at that story, and you see how many backs that she had to step on to become the quote unquote girl boss.
Terrifying title, honestly.
I think the first sort of inkling of all that started with Disney.
Oh, interesting. Say more about that.
Because, they had, after a while, and they started reissuing, they periodically would reissue the classics, and people were like, wait a minute, this is some really racist shit. So I think to kind of bend focus from that legacy, they started creating these women characters, young women characters, young girls that were had their own agency, and even though a lot of racist shit was still going on in these films, they had these female characters that would kind of distract. So instead of answering to that legacy that they had, they started creating these characters to distract from that. And and it's not the same representation as we were just talking about, but I feel like that's kind of the trajectory that started it, because along with that, then they were like, hey, you should buy this doll because it's a totally empowered doll. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
So that's kind of where I started noticing that trend and it totally ties into, white feminism, because it's we're not racist. We're the same. We're badasses, fuck all that. And it's
we're all equal.
Yeah.
Never mind all these power
What the
structures.
fuck,
Just don't live there.
Yeah.
BJ?
You work hard enough, we're all the same.
We can all make it, because you know what? If you work hard enough, your dreams will come true.
Oh my gosh.
I think
That's
of all those pins and mugs that are girl boss or badass bitch.
Yes, queen.
Or little embroidered shirts.
Yeah.
And BJ, what did you want to chime in?
So I wanted to piggyback off of a couple points that were being made. My, I guess, introduction to the idea of girl bossery came because before the pandemic, I was a teacher. And in 2014 is when we started getting the ban bossy movement that was, hammered on Lifetime. So the network for women. And they got Beyonce to be the spokesperson for it, which then meant white women immediately had to take it as gospel because that's what white women do anytime Beyonce exists. And what ended up happening is something that had very good intentions, because yes, there are absolutely double standards that exist between if a man stands up for himself, he's viewed as a leader, and if a woman does, she's difficult or she's a brat or whatever. Those are very true things. But then what ended up happening that I would see in my classrooms is a lot of my white students started using that as sort of a shield to remove any sort of accountability for their actions. And then it was then encouraged by their parents, where I would call them and say, hey, your kid cut the hair of another student today because it landed on their desk, and that's not okay. She's asserting the protection of her space. I'm like, no, she's breaking the rules, and we need to talk about why we do not cut the hair of our other classmates. I disagree. I disagree with that. I think you should be more in control of your classroom. She's exploring. And it's that sound and that mentality that I think is just the personification of girl bosses. I'm doing what I have to do. I'm strong. You can't correct me because girl boss. And I don't believe that. It's a really gross weaponization of femininity. It's a very gross weaponization of capitalism and definitely of whiteness, for sure.
Yeah, like echoing on BJ, I've noticed that it's been something that's allowed white women specifically to weaponize, whether it be like mental health buzzwords against like queer people, POC people, where it's like, I'm cutting out my toxic friends, but like the toxic friends that they speak of are like queer friends and like POC friends that are like, hey, you're crossing a lot of like emotional boundaries with me, or like, I need you to be here for me. And they're like, oh, I just can't deal with that right now. I don't have the capacity. So you're like gone now. And like, it is tied in capitalism. It's why like Miriam was saying that they could sell these Barbies and, you know, you can sell those pins and you can sell those mugs, because it's just capitalism with a pretty new face. Like the thing about the girl boss that makes the girl boss so sinister is that it's found a way to commodify feminism. And the guise is that it's for equality, but the asterisk is that the equality is equal with the oppressor. The equality isn't, you know, equal for equality for everyone. It's, I want to be just as powerful as the white men in power.
Yes. I want to go over to Chauncy, who had her hand raised.
Yeah, I was just going to say it's interesting when I first heard about, you know, coming on this panel, because I got gifted a few years ago with something that stays in the back of my of my desk. And it was, you know, it was from a family member. Yeah, and it's a girl boss. And I got gifted with it a few years back, you know, a family member or whatever, you know, from Jersey. And I was like, I don't think they know that, like, I'm a Marxist. And I don't believe in, like, bosses and exploitation. That's not what I'm trying to do necessarily. But yeah, I was just going to echo what others have said so well, which is that a lot of times what it ends up translating into is that it's not equality for all. It's necessarily, it's more so equality with the oppressor. It's like, you know, exploitation of the workers, but in pink, you know, like kind of a vibe like that. It's not necessary. I think in some terms it might have started off as being empowering, but then you have to question empowering for who. I mean, that's always the question of like, who does this serve? Who does this benefit? And a lot of times when it comes to, you know, terms such as this, is that you see the types that are associated with who use it and who it is used against necessarily. So yeah, I think it's I don't like to use the word toxic necessarily, because I don't think there's anyone literally walking around with nauseous gases. And I'm gonna die if I sit next to them or something like that. But I do think that it comes from a way of you know, obscuring what it really is about, which is just, you know, people who want to basically be just
that one, a successful woman has to be a girl boss and not just like a regular boss, but it's also equating like a successful feminist with like oppressor success. And like, I don't know, like it's equating success with something that is rooted in capitalism and assuming that a successful woman is someone who is just as much of a, you know, oppressor as like their capitalist white male counterparts. And also queer women and people of color are like, and just queer people in general, non-binary people are not really included in the narrative at all. It's kind of just, it's very much rooted in heteronormativity to begin with.
I mean, I think it kind of operates based on like exploitation, to be honest. I mean, that's capitalism in general. But yeah, like to me, when it's this like idea of, well, because I'm doing these things and I'm a woman, therefore this is feminist, therefore this is empowerment. But really it's just like exploiting poor women, exploiting Black and brown women, indigenous women, queer women. That's, yeah, to me, what like the girl boss is.
Absolutely.
I think somebody said like weaponized female empowerment, but it's like empowerment, you know?
Yeah. And Monika and Mariam, your film collective, Audre's Revenge, is named after Audre Lorde, right? And was it not Audre Lorde that questioned when, you know, white feminists are talking about equality, it's equal to whom? Because not all men are equal to each other.
Right. I think about her saying, her quote, "The master's tools will not dismantle the master's house," because it's pretty clear cut, you know. And I think that was like a response to second wave white feminism, where, you know, the consistent silencing of Black feminists at that time was very consistent with their goals all along. Because when you look at it, a lot of the women that were participating in that weren't really thinking about anybody else's rights other than their own. Like, they wanted to escape a conditioned life of staying at home and not working and taking care of the family, whereas Black women were trying to navigate this life of being racialized and also having their gender held against them. So it's kind of like, you know, being at the bottom of the barrel, like dealing with the master's like partner who also wants to gain that same type of power that their husband does. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like this girl boss thing is just like multiplied over time, and it's just like come into forbearance of what that type of feminism was actually about in the first place. So it's like a bit more transparent than what it was and what feminists at that time were willing to admit their end games were, you know. So yeah. And I think it's specifically because Audre Lorde did a lot of her work within the queer community, and she spent a lot of time trying to organize non-white lesbians and queer people with the Combahee River Collective and such nature. Like, I feel like when we first started Audre's Revenge, we noticed that there was this lack of leadership within the horror community that centered on non-heteronormative identities. And as you can see, that's still a very real thing within the horror community, especially in regards to gatekeeping and withholding resources and just like having this extreme scene of nepotism that exists that has, you know, not so secretly excluded people that are just like us. So Audre's Revenge film in that essence is kind of like the catalyst to encourage spaces that are safer for us, where we don't have to play by, you know, girl boss rules, so to speak.
Yeah. About creating, I think the only true way to live in that sense of, you know, basically we have to work with outside of that framework. So once we remove those people from the conversation, like white men, like white cis men, and they don't dictate what the rules of engagement are with one another, is when you can actually create something for one another. I mean, we all have to work within it, but I think a big part of what we do is to take them reflecting on it, but we don't have the same rules because we have our own. It's not even like, there is no such thing as a safe space in this world, right? Because we live under this umbrella, but at the same time, like, that doesn't mean we're not going to take it.
Right.
Right now, you know, fuck them. So.
So,
tell us how you really feel, Mariam.
I'm really interested in the types of portrayals that you have seen in genre films that you really like, that you'd like to see more of, or that you really need and you don't see at all. One of the things that really, a few films that came out recently that really got my back up on this, and it felt like we absolutely must address this. I see the Girlboss coming up in 3 ways, and I'd like to see if you guys feel similar, if you have any other opinions about it. These are just example movies, but I Care a Lot is a recent film on Netflix with Rosamund Pike winning the Best Actress in Golden Globe for. And that was like a straight up girl boss. It's revealed that she's queer like about halfway through the film, but because it was written and directed by a straight man, he doesn't know anything about women's lives or the ways we express ourselves with other women and queer relationships. So you don't see any of that in it. The whole time she's just saying like, I want to make money and I want to do this and I'll fight to the end because I'm a woman. Constantly kind of being mad about men oppressing her, but she's actually actively abusing the elderly. But it's like shown as like girl power throughout. And then the other, so that's like a straight up, straightforward girl boss. And then the other type I see recently is the like, men are stupid and like women need to be there because dumb men. And that's more in horror comedies or genre comedies. And I'm thinking of like Men in Black International. I'm obsessed with Tessa Thompson, but I felt like her character was kept being in these situations where she was like, ugh, men, good thing a woman's here. And then the same thing with like the Ghostbusters, the all women Ghostbusters was very much like, women could do it because men are stupid. And then the third type of girl boss I see with Promising Young Woman, which is a highly feminized, like girls kick ass with their lipstick and with their awesome clothes, and like we're taking it back, ladies, because it's hot to be femme. But inside, but they're really victimized the entire time, and that the idea is that part of the women's experience is being victimized, and that's just who we are. So I'm really curious. Those are the 3 main types that I see. So I'm curious if you guys see anything else and what you would prefer to see in film. Sorry, there's like a little bit of noise happening. I'm not sure where it's coming in at. It feels like a fan to me. Is that happening for anybody else?
Yeah, I'm hearing it as well.
Here, let me
It's probably me. It's my heater. I'll turn my mic off until I speak.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Okay, go forth.
I think one of my favorite, I know this might, I work in a horror framework, but one of my favorite portrayals of like girl bossery was, what was it? Oh shit. Well, first of all, Ripley, Lieutenant Ripley from Alien. And I resonate a lot. I like that character a lot because it wasn't even like, she didn't choose it. She didn't want to be the hero. She was thrown into a situation where she was like, well, okay, I guess it's me. Like, it's a survival, which I think a lot of people of color can resonate with. Like, I think of my grandmother, my mother, and like situations they had been thrown in like colonial Mexico. You know what I mean? Like, I think of things like that where there's no other option. Like, if you survive, you have to turn into this badass. Like, so that character is a character that I think is really hard to portray now, you know. And there's a lot of questionable stuff about it too, but I that's one character. And the other one is, do you ever see that movie Death Becomes Her?
Oh yeah. I love Death Becomes Her.
Okay, everybody. I love that because it's a mockery of that framework. And it's so it's so ridiculous, and the white male that they have to depend on is almost, what they want from him is skill, right? It's incidental, and they joke a lot about their currency as women, their age, you know, their femininity, and you know, they do all these despicable things, which I think I Care a Lot was trying to kind of do, sort of, but it's not the same shit. Yeah, it's just not the same. And So I think those are the portrayals that I really like, because they did a really good job of the satirical aspect of it. As far as modern interpretations, I haven't seen one that satisfies me, only because, and that sounds like I haven't seen one that satisfies me, but I mean, I haven't seen one that really answers to what I see as a switch from white women fragility to white, like this vindictive, nasty woman that's mimicking exactly the same shit. Like somehow, yeah, you become an equal once you can be as vicious as a white man, you know?
Yeah.
So instead of being
Well
like,
put.
help me, they're like, I'm gonna help myself and be a total bastard. Like that's what I see the flip flop. Even though people still, that's still totally 100,000 million% used in every aspect of our lives. That is, it's very dangerous. But this is another type of dangerous. This is as dangerous as well.
Yeah.
Well, it's frustrating because, as we say in comedy, like it's not satire unless you understand what you are satirizing. And I think the biggest problem with Promising Young Woman and I Care a Lot is that the writers don't understand, first of all, the issues that women are struggling with in general, what women want. And again, I'm saying women so loosely because it's very different per race and sexuality and income. But I mean, they don't even take one slice of anything from any group. It was kind of just this general idea that like, actually what's interesting is that the issue that I think a lot of straight white men who haven't explored feminism have thought for years is that women hate men or they're angry at men. And that's what they've poured into these characters is like the cynical revenge that doesn't really actually have anything to do with our real problems. Which of course Emerald Fennell is a straight woman, but she is very, very rich.
Right.
Which I think pulls into it. BJ?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think when we look at characters from, probably like 20, 30 years ago, it's a little bit more of a caricature. And it's something that we can easily identify. We look at this character and we're like, oh, I'm not supposed to like you. I think about like a Tracy Flick in Election, where she is like baby girl boss in training. And we know immediately, like, we are not supposed to like you. And then as we have moved forward, I think the girl boss characters have gotten so complicated because they're playing with a lot of different moral quandaries. Because I watch something like I Care a Lot, where one half of me is like, I hate this woman. I hate what she's doing. I think that she's an awful person. But then another part of me is like, well, I'm angry enough that I kind of don't care. And I like monstrous femmes. I like when women are just like, fuck it, and do whatever they want. So it's playing with that moral complication. And I think a similar one that I have with Promising Young Woman is that, as somebody who is a survivor of horrendous sexual abuse, there are a lot of aspects of that movie I think are really, really interesting, that I think are done quite well. I like that there's a moment between the character of Cassie and Laverne Cox's character where she says, like, why do you work here? Why don't you just go off and, get a house and get a boyfriend and get a better job? And her response is, I can do that. I know that I can, but I don't want it. So then now there's this complication of like, so you're fully aware of the privileges that you have, but you're opting out. But that in itself is a privilege that you can opt out of these things, whereas so many people don't have the choice to opt out. So it gets complicated and it gets really messy. And I think when it comes to movies like this, it's impossible for us to experience them and not bring our lived experiences along for that ride. So because of that, trying to have this type of character is going to be impossible, because there is not one lived experience that exists culturally. There just isn't. And culture likes to frame it a certain way and pretend that we all have those experiences. But, everyone in this room, I promise, has a different interpretation of all of these films, solely based on what we've been through, what we haven't been through, the privileges that we have, the privileges that we don't have. And I think that makes it really fascinating, and also makes it really difficult to have a solid female villain. Because that's the other thing too, is like, when I watch these movies, I'm never like, yeah, I want to be just like them. I look at them like, oh, you're a villain. And I like when women get to be villains. But at the same time, it's like, but what messages are we taking away? Like the amount of men who watched Promising Young Woman, or like, this movie hates men, and I'm like, that you're telling on yourself if you think that movie hates men. What are you doing that you feel attacked by this? We have a talk here. And I think that's where it gets complicated. And I think it's okay for these to be complicated, because then it forces discussion. But unfortunately, I think the people who need to hear these discussions don't participate and don't pay attention.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was sorry, can I?
Yes, definitely. Chauncy.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, it's always interesting to me when even like around Promising Young Woman, when that came out and I saw what it was about, and I thought to myself, just as a journalist and person in media, I'm like, oh my gosh, everyone's gonna eat this up. You know, they're gonna eat up this movie. This is gonna be touted as the next woman empowerment type thing, and just like other films, you know, similar to that. I mean, it was kind of Oscar bait, but it was also just this idea, because there's such a streamlined way that people view, or I feel like the mainstream media, I want to say, kind of views what feminism is, what empowerment looks like, and it fits a certain kind of person. And I can say, just myself as someone, one of the reasons why I became a film critic and someone who wanted to talk about culture and stuff, because I just saw that there was always this sort of narrative at times that really just looked at it from a gaze that wasn't, I didn't feel like included someone like me as a Black woman and whatnot, because I'd look at female empowerment, oh, what's this about? And then I'd see a white woman on it. And I admit, the first thing I thought, like, oh, another one of these, you know, and I don't want to think that way, but a lot of the time, and then I would watch and I'd be like, oh, it's another one. Sometimes it'd be like, oh, it's another one of these, you know, where I'm not included. I may be the best friend or something, and, you know, there's kind of a thing, and I teach her a moment or something like that, and she gets expansion, and I've helped. You know, someone like me has helped this main girl story, because I'm never the main person in this kind of story. And, you know, just like something like this, when you look at the fact of, you know, sexual assault and things like that, and just that it does affect so many, and it does affect so many, especially Black women, you know, in terms of this country, you know, from the very onset, you know, and things like that, and the history of being over sexualized and things like that, and what that means, you know, because when we talk about, there's so many different layers. When one person thinks empowerment is, you know, it could be this idea of, I want to let my, you know, freak flag fly or whatever. Someone else might think my empowerment is actually being able not to be, you know, looked at a certain way, because maybe my people like me have always been looked at as over-sexualized. Like, there was a time when Black women were considered never to be able to be raped, because we were already always available for, you know, sex, you know, things like that. So there can be something seen as empowering of not wanting to be like that. But that nuance is so lost. And I think it goes hand in hand with the movies that come out, but the way we discuss the movies that come out, right? That's why, you know, as for, you know, when people get mad at film critics, and there's always the roundabout, like, why do we need film critics anyway? They suck. But it's, the part is that you need to be able to analyze ideologies in art, because it is part of, I don't want to get into, but like the idea of like a ruling class or capitalism, they push certain status quo and ideologies in there. And if you don't look at it, it gets pushed on you. And if you don't have someone pointing out like, hey, that's them telling you should just be okay with settling and thinking that all the bosses are smarter than you and you're just a worker bee or something like that. If no one points that out, it doesn't get seen, and we just kind of take it in. You know, and that's why it's so important to be on both ends of discussions of things like this, of empowerment, to be able to point out when someone, like, I might feel like someone is eating this up or something like that, and it's like, yeah, this is great, every woman should want to adhere to that. I'd be like, well, actually, you know, and then that could be seen as like, why are you being argumentative? This is just why you have to be divisive about this. It's not being divisive to note the differences or the lack of inclusion, you know? So I think though that kind of conversation has to happen sometimes, because I do think it gets a blanketed kind of a thing of what empowerment is. And sometimes it tends to be empowerment equals white women.
Yeah.
I want to go to Vanessa, who wanted to make a point, but real quick, Chauncy, are there characters in genre film that you're like, yes, this makes me feel empowered, or just like something you haven't seen that you want to see more of, or nothing that you've seen at all that you're ready for?
You know, I think there's that added thing of, I think, being a Black woman and kind of wanting to see more of myself. So sometimes I I look at a character, they're sometimes not even the best character, but I'm like, oh my gosh, yes, this person, I want to love this person because there's so few. But I have seen some, but it's not overtly, the idea of, she's a badass woman type thing. Like I love Demon Knight is one of my favorite ones. And it's because of Jada Pinkett Smith and that thing. Like she is like my favorite final girl, one of my favorite final girls, just the way, and she's never put on some of these lists in these mainstream horror websites and things. And it's like, when I see a list of badass final girls, they're all white women. And I'm like, I know Pam Grier was in Blackula too. I know she was. Like, am I losing that? I know she was, things like that. But yeah, those kind of characters, Jada Pinkett Smith and Demon Knight is definitely probably one of my faves for sure. And Pam Grier in anything.
Yes.
Even when she shows her boobs, I'm like, yes, I'm digging it. Go ahead, you make that choice.
What's interesting too about Demon Knight is, like, of course, slashers don't really have the girl boss vibe in the same way, but she's a waitress, right? So like right away they establish her being the most, she ends up being the most powerful woman, but they don't set her up as like, I'm here to get banged, I'm the strongest woman alive. Like, she's a very regular woman that I feel like a lot of us who come, up from working class backgrounds or who have been, retailer waitresses for a long time, you're like, yes, you could actually see yourself in that character. Vanessa, you had a point you wanted to make?
Oh yeah, I just wanted to, there's something that I've been noticing when it comes to like both these characters and also like the people that like want to fit the archetypes of these characters, that like there's almost always three elements to like the cocktail of the girl boss character, and it's usually written by men, but I've also seen it like written by white women. And it's like, one, she's always a monolith. She's always a monolith for like the experience of all women, no matter what, even though like she could have no idea about what goes on in like someone queer's life. She's usually like she's very like for the monolith of the binary, and like nobody else gets to exist within that. She speaks for everyone. Secondly, like I feel like whenever men use this word, I hate it so much more than when women use it, and that's like badass. Because like when a woman describes a character as a badass, I know what she's talking about. But when a man describes a character as a badass, it usually means she doesn't have feelings. She never cries, she's never afraid, and it's just like, I know I'm a strong person. I cry every day, and that has like nothing else to do with it. I'm just in my feels all the time. And so they like write somebody cold and cruel as like a substitute for strong. And usually the counter to that is if she does cry, it's usually weaponizing it against like Black and brown women for like an overstep where it's like, why are you being so mean to me? And then the last one is she knows what everybody like is supposed to be doing, but she doesn't understand that like all of those resources available to her aren't available to everyone. She like tells men to go to therapy, even though like that's not something that's like affordable or accessible for a lot of people. She tells women that they should like dump their awful boyfriends, but provides nothing for them when they like get out and like need support and actual resources and a place to live. But like she knows what everybody should be doing, and it's their fault that they're not doing it.
That's really well put. What about for you, Vanessa? Are there characters that you're like, yes, I love it, or that you want to see in genre film that you haven't seen?
I mean, for me, I like when we're allowed to be complicated and messy. I like that we're allowed to be layers, and we don't have to be in like just avoiding compartmentalizing us, because I this might be like, I don't think it's a controversial one, but one movie that like really opened up a lot of doors for me when I was younger was watching Black Christmas and seeing a woman express that she wanted an abortion, and nobody, like the only person that was like villainizing her was a villain. The only person that was like treating her like her choice was wrong was somebody that we knew we were like against anyway. And every single woman in that movie was like different from each other, and there wasn't like an archetype. They were just people. They were just like complicated, layered people. And it's one that I feel like even now when somebody tries to touch on, they do like the commodifying feminism thing instead of just writing unique ass characters.
Right. Yeah, that's absolutely right. And also something that you touched on regarding like kind of the portrayal of like strength as a very specific thing, I feel like is a hallmark of this kind of trope. And it's something that, you know, one makes me think about how we equate, like, it makes me think of the strong female lead thing. It's I don't know necessarily if girl boss is synonymous with that, but I think they're very much interlinked. And equating strength and a strong, you know, female character, it's usually very limiting. It's usually very specific traits, and it's a very specific lens on what being a woman is. And it's usually regarding like, it's either regarding like success, or if they're strong, if they're not super successful, they're usually quite cold and brash, and not in like a self-expressive way, in like a we're not supposed to like them way. And it also generally seems to circulate around them hating men, which is like, I get, and you know, something I've talked about before is like, you know, Lucy and I were chatting about how like in day-to-day life, it's very much a real thing of being like frustrated with like cishet white men and like things that they do that are very directly affecting us, and it's very frustrating. But then when we see women portrayed on screen and their only dimension of their character is them hating men, it's like, it's difficult, because I understand that being a response to our day-to-day frustrations of the patriarchal structure that we live in. But it's difficult because it's like, and it still dilutes who we are, because we're limiting ourselves to kind of submitting to this very binary structure. And I find it difficult to see female characters or female leads be, you know, portrayed as much else besides this very binary view that's like a direct response to what generally affluent white women believe we need to respond to the patriarchal structure to. And so I'm curious what you guys feel about how kind of this strong female lead archetype is portrayed in genre film, because it's very much something that is marketed towards us, and kind of that's how the girl boss character is marketed. It's like, you're gonna love this because it's a woman and she's a bad girl. And I don't know, like there's some ways where it works, but I feel like oftentimes where that archetype doesn't work for me is when it's diluted to the fact that she's a strong female lead, but she's not a well-written or strong character or dimensional.
Well, it falls back onto the like girls rule, boys drool sort of like t-shirt feminism
So
of like the
male-centric.
90s. Yeah, and it ignores the fact that women are also the problem. Like, I love women, I'm queer, but like, as you all know, women are a big part of the problem, because we have all been raised in the white cishet patriarchy. And so there's internalized misogyny that then we also project out, and that we also are misogynist and most importantly racist and classist, and we oppress others also. I mean, I'm saying we because I am a white woman, so not necessarily applies to everyone here, but those are the strong female leads that are often saying like, better the worst. It's like, all right, woman, you're not so great either.
Right. Well, when the character, like, it seems that our responses in film and how we're portrayed generally still circulate around one thing, and it circulates around usually men, but not limited to men. It still circulates around what like the white woman idea of kind of like ending the patriarchy is, and it's very limiting. It's not representative of every woman. It's not representative of every man even. It's still very binary and heteronormative.
Well, even that seems like super male-centric in the sense of it's not like actually confronting and trying to dismantle patriarchy. It's like trying to elevate white women to the level that, you know, white men are at, and being like, okay, work is done here. Great. It's all done. And I feel like that's kind of what, like, to me at least, made Promising Young Woman feel like a girl boss movie, and that it didn't like, actually like confront or like try to, you know, dismantle what the system was in any way. It just kind of played along inside of it. And it also like didn't at all seem aware of, I guess, its whiteness. I don't know how else to phrase that, but yeah, like it just, I don't know.
See, that's my biggest contention with all of this, is that it frames these white women as like constantly preoccupied with the power that men have, even though they greatly benefit from it. You know, they're constantly greatly benefiting from the system in place. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like, there's no acknowledgement that there's any level of that happening.
Exactly.
So, when I saw, did you all ever see MFA? It's a rape revenge movie by a woman, and it's a white woman, and there's no, it's like a straight up revenge story, you know, and it's not revolutionary. I mean, if you know anything about Audre's Revenge, we're 100% about we want to burn everything down and build it our own way. You know what I mean? But the whole problem with it is it had, it worked within the framework in a kind of realistic way. And then you have movies like You're Next, where you have this, I compared the two, like, or Promising Young Woman, like, I'll take You're Next, only because there is, and it's kind of sad to say it, I relate more to characters that are thrown in a situation where they have to survive. And that, I think, is a testament to something that is not necessarily always experienced by, like, white women or women with, you know, or we can get into colorism later. I mean, I'm white, right? But I mean, you know, like, cultural differences between women and how it's lived in different places in the world. So even when I see things like The Witch, and you're like, hell yeah, she's doing her own thing, but it's like, there's still this man that's giving you the power, right? So even though I love that movie, there's Black Phillip, who, she receives her power from a man, or this like male deity, right? So I think that's the structure that always fucks with me, and the fact that there's absolutely you're right, there's no dimension. There's no dimension, there's no vulnerability. It's just like someone being as cruel as, like, hey, like, our defense secretary is a woman, now she can bomb Afghanistan. You know, that's not girl boss, you know, like.
Bombing with rainbows and heart emojis is equality. I actually am curious, because I think about the decentralization of toxic masculinity, especially internalized masculinity, and what does, because Promising Young Woman, I think, is categorized as a rape revenge film, but not so much. I think they kind of strayed away from that because of, like, its genre, its subgenre capabilities, and they wanted to have, like, that Oscar fast track, because we already know how the academies exclude any other type of film genre. So I was just kind of curious about, like, whether any type of direct action that is portrayed in the film, if that is along the lines of actively decentralizing toxic masculinity and taking it back into a space where it is a type of feminine empowerment, like, not centering masculinity in regards to the action taken against, like, one's oppressors. You know what I mean? Like, I think that was what I was left with Promising Young Woman, because in my opinion, I think that the best representation of Black femininity in genre film is probably Abby, because it talks about respectability politics and, like, how she was, like, living this life, and it's probably the most broad, like, contextual, like, character in horror films, like, in regards to Black, like, feminine struggles, just because, you know, she's like the protagonist, and she becomes possessed by, you know, traditional African spiritual deities or whatever else. But she takes, like, this type of liberatory approach of trying to decenter all the masculine influence, like, within her life. And they kind of, like, leave it up to the viewer to, like, interpret that as they will. Like, when she has a meltdown, like, in church, while the preacher is, like, speaking, and she just completely, like, acts out, like, you know, it's just, like, all these different types of elements. But, like, I'm very curious to see, like, you know, if there will be a space for women to actually take like that, like power, like without like the whole emotional nihilism of like toxic masculinity, but being able to actively fight back against that without having that brand of like furthering the patriarchy.
BJ, you had your hand raised earlier. Did you want to speak still?
Oh, you're muted.
You're muted.
My neighbor is mowing his lawn, so I was like, I'm gonna spare everyone that.
You knew.
Sweet, yeah. Thank you.
But what I was gonna say is, when I think about like strong female characters, I think a lot of them have this big like hashtag not like most girls energy, which I'm super not thrilled about. And when we were talking about like the characters that we resonate with, or that we see ourselves in, I wanted to like take time and really think about it. And I think for me, like it comes back with Elvira, and the reason that it's Elvira, and go with me on this journey here, because from like an outsider looking in, they're like, but why? Like she fulfills all of like these patriarchal desires, and like there's a lot of male gaze going on, but also at the same time, like I'm a square box right now, but like I have gigantic boobs, and that has influenced how I've been treated since childhood. And I've been made to feel really terrible about that. And Elvira had a quote, I'm gonna butcher the shit out of it, but she was talking about this idea of androgyny. And when we think about androgyny, we have a tendency to think about like people that we read as men. So like Freddie Mercury, David Bowie, those types of men, and then we add femininity to them, or they act in a feminine way, and our brains are like, oh, that's androgyny. But then you have somebody like Elvira, who is quote unquote like very high femme, but her attitude and her mannerisms and the way that she exists in spaces has very like masculine energy. But we don't consider that androgyny. We consider that like high femme, or like quote unquote sluttiness or whatever. And I've always found that really interesting, because like I can't change the way that I look, and like my presentation of being high femme is not like feeding into a patriarchal thing. I fucking like glitter, and I can't draw. So when I paint, I put it on my face, because that I can control. And there's this real complication that exists when we have these strong female characters, because they either completely take away any sort of femininity, because that means bad, that means patriarchy. Like one of my big frustrations recently was when the whole Lola Bunny fiasco happened. And I was like, I don't care that she's, you know, now that she is differently drawn, that's fine. My issue is when a director says we wanted her to be strong instead of sexy. That bothers the hell out of me. Why not both? Like, yeah, so frustrating. Yeah. So, and then there's also, I'm gonna butcher this too, but there's a moment in the movie The Battery, Jeremy Gardner's first feature film, where it's, you know, it's the end of the world, and the person that he's experiencing the end of the world with is hearing a female voice on the other end of a radio, and he's like obsessed with her, like, I gotta meet her, I gotta find her. And he then kind of breaks down the quote unquote strong female character of like, yeah, I bet she's got some really cool jean shorts that are caught off like just right, and they fit really nice. And, you know, she's got a scar on her face because she's been through some shit, but it's placed just so across her eyes that it doesn't actually affect what her face looks like. So, you know, she's tough, but she's still really beautiful. And, you know, she's got that tank top on. I bet it's a little bit too small because she hasn't been able to wash it, so it's been shrinking. And it's this great monologue where it's a guy pointing out like, here's the archetype that we present to the world and think of as like the strong female character that men are comfortable with. Like that's the character they're comfortable with. When in reality, like the strongest woman that I know is probably a Black trans woman of color. Like they are stronger than anyone that I know. But that's not the character we're putting forward, because we still want our movies to be fantastical. Reality isn't fun.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. And also like what you had said about androgyny, and also like I can also speak to growing up with big boobs. It shifted my view of how I view myself, because I'm, constantly viewing myself through the lens of other people and through the lens of them looking at me. And if I don't wear a bra, then I either look sloppy or I look sexy, and I can't just look neutral. And also the idea of androgyny is very much rooted in masculinity, and I don't feel like I can ever truly look androgynous because of the way I am pre-existing. And I think that those ideas of androgyny, we can see it in film, and we can see it. It's always like if a woman is a tomboy, or if someone is non-binary, or if someone is just dressing androgynous but still presenting femme, it's usually some sort of over-sexualized version of it. It's usually like, if a woman is dressed like a tomboy or is dressing androgynous, it is usually like some like tighter version of like what a man's supposed to wear. And it's never quite just like that's how she dresses, and it's not sexualized. It almost always is.
Well, I think that connects to what Monika was saying about decentralizing the masculine influence in our stories and in representation, because as BJ was saying, that like if a woman is able to move through male spaces, that really is androgynous. But I don't think that's seen by men or like the general patriarchy that we're in, because male stories and lives are always, and white especially men, default experience, right? Like that's the experience we've all had to figure out how to relate to growing up. And so when a woman's doing that, then she's just acting like as she should, sort of. And Emma and I were talking about when we were putting this together, like what movies are they decentralized from men? Because we kept coming up with movies we liked, and then we're like, well, that's kind of just their reaction to men. And there's so many horror movies that are in reaction to men, and I get that, because men are really terrifying in a lot of ways and have enacted a lot of violence on us for thousands of years. So it makes sense. There's a sort of release in some ways, especially with some rape revenge films. But I also think I liked what Mariam said about, I love The Witch also, and I never thought about how it's like a man giving power at the end. Maybe the goat thing threw me off. It's a goat giving her power. It's different. Yeah, but no, exactly. I mean, it's Satan. So I hadn't considered that before. And one of my favorite horror films where I love the portrayal of the lead character is The Babadook by Jennifer Kent. I really love the lead character in that, because she is like weak and strong and scared and sad and violent and oppressed, and you see her do a lot of things you don't get to see women do, like kill a dog. Not that it's a good thing, but like that was a terrifying moment, because women are always portrayed and expected to be like caretakers all the time, and you think has everyone seen it? You think she's gonna kill her kid. It's been out for 10 years. So you're like, oh my God, seeing a mother kill their child, like that's pretty transgressive. And she had to sort of deal with her own grief. And of course it is in relation to her husband dying, but I do think that that's her grief is sort of also her struggle, which I find really interesting. Are there characters, or if you guys have any feelings about the Babadook, please chime in. Mariam, and then after that, anybody who is thinking of characters that are decentralized from like the male experience.
I think there are two movies, but they're unintentionally, they do it. Alucarda, that Mexican horror film called Alucarda.
Yes.
It's like centered around women, but it's like nuns and these two teenage girls, and then they, fall in love, and it's like, oh no, Satan's making them be lesbians, and it's like a total, and it's gory and it's fun to watch, but the sort of like teenage passion part, I was like, yes. The first time I fell in love with a girl, it was like that. Like I was like, holy shit, this is it. I'm gonna die for this. I'm done. It's like,
yes,
that part of it, but also the sort of like piety aspects of the nuns, and the sort of that weird giving, like constantly giving nature of, and they give so much that their bodies bleed from every pore. Like that fucked me up. But I was like, I get it. You know, there's something going on here that isn't talked about. And the other one is, and it's, again, this is a weird one, but it's Slumber Party Massacre. Only because Amy Jones, like, she couldn't help it. Like, the parts where there's, you know, it's supposed to be like the male gaze, right? But then there are parts where like you see men's asses in the shower, and then the girls at their slumber party aren't talking about boys, they're talking about basketball. You know, there's like these unintentional things, and even like the queer coding of the male neighbor, and there are things that I think that were unintentional, but it's completely different, and it is about male violence. But, and you know, a lot of bad shit happens, but those sort of like ordinary moments are really illuminating as far as how of circumventing that like male gaze, but it could a completely unintentional way. And I find that interesting because it's not, neither of those two movies like set out to be like, this is going to be this and this is going to be that, you know, it just came out in the way they were made. So for me.
I was gonna say something about the Babadook, and just, I mean, I liked that film to a certain degree, but I also felt like it fell into this thing that I've been thinking about, even though I'm someone who has decided that my children will be my cats for probably the rest of my days. I don't want, you know, human kids. But, you know, there's this idea, I think, when it comes to women in films, that if it's not a man per se, then there's this question of the motherhood, you know, of sacrificing for the kids constantly. If she's not, you know, rejecting this patriarchy or these men or saying how much I hate this man, it's like everything for my child, everything That's for my kid. And this was another thing that came out in a film I saw some months ago called Come Play, that came out.
Yes.
And I hated that ending because I was like, what? Like, does she not want to live for herself? What is this? You know, like, why is it either or? Why is it just this idea of, you know, if it's an empowered woman or if it's a woman with a strong will, her strong will is for her family or for her kid. And then sometimes, you know, I tend to find sometimes kids in horror movies, I think they do it on purpose to make them annoying. But it was just like this idea where it's like, oh my gosh, and the Babadook, I hated that son. I was just like, oh my gosh, no wonder she's going crazy. This kid is nuts. Like, this kid is really bad. You know, but I'm somehow made to believe, oh shit, this is a problem. She has to fix this. I'm like, no, something needs to go on with her child, you know. But it's this idea of this weirdness where women have to. It's this idea of, like, I think one of the other questions you were saying were like, you know, martyrdom. You know, this idea of sacrifice of that the woman has to have, and it's usually for someone else. It's not for herself. It's usually either this and it's for Black women in film, it's for the white woman that happens, actually. Like, a lot of time in the horror films, like Freddy versus Jason, Kelly Rowland should not have died in that film, and she literally did it to save her friend. And I'm like, what are you doing? Like, don't you want to live? Like, what's going on here? You know, I'm like, I wouldn't have decided that at all. You know, so it's just like this idea of sacrifice that happens when it's, in general, woman, it's either for the child or it's for the family. And then for Black women, I've usually seen it like, you know, the magical Negro trope and things like that, where it's like, it's for the white people who are so much like Annabelle, the first movie, Annabelle, where, you know, I'm like, what are you doing? That's not what your daughter would have wanted for you, you know, for you to sacrifice yourself for this other woman and her child. Like, what's with that? You know, so, and it just shows the differences that happen too, where it's like with white women, it's that, and then when Black women are usually in films, it's for the main white characters that happen, which is, I think it's fascinating how that plays out, but it also plays with the intersectionality of, you know, race and gender. So, yeah.
I think my favorite movie where, you know, you have that like thing about like sacrifice and martyrdom, and the character like chooses not to make that sacrifice, and I love her so much for it, because just by like a change of casting, they like truly illustrated how much bullshit it was that she was even expected to in the first place, was Melanie and the Girl with All the Gifts.
Oh my God, yes.
I love that movie so much. I love it more every time I watch it. The actress that plays Melanie is incredible in it. But like, for those that haven't seen it, it's a zombie movie that like asks deep questions about life that you wouldn't otherwise ask, in terms of like, who do we decide gets to survive? Who do we decide gets to be like the continuation of humanity? Where you know, they're studying her for a cure, but then she like gets to experience life and live life on the outside of these constraints that they built her. And so once they like once again are like, hey, you could be the cure to like save us all, she's like, why do I have to die for you? Like, why does it have to be you instead of me? Like, you know, you keep saying the world is ending, but for who? Because mine's just starting. And like, you know, she does like extend that mercy to others, and that like you get to live, but you get to live in my world. Because, you know, I am now like the strong thing that gets to like exist past this. I'm not gonna like die to be a cure for 5 people that say I have to die. And like, I feel like Melanie never gets to be in these conversations. Melanie chose like, I'm not being sacrificed. I am living. I am thriving. And like, I'm not dying because you say I have to.
I'm so glad you brought that up, Vanessa. That's on my list too for this question, because it's it's one of my all-time favorite movies.
I love that movie.
Watch it if you haven't watched it. It's amazing.
I really love the idea of you keep saying the world is ending, but for who? I think that's that was really well put. I think that you do see that in so many horror movies. Of course, you know, main character, that's who you're following, but I think it extends out into the world where it's like we're all our own main characters, right? And that's part of like the girl boss thing is especially white women being so, I don't know, high on their own supply of like, I am the main character. I am the one fixing the world. I know it. When I rise to the top, all will be saved. And I think that's a really interesting question, an important question to like keep in mind when we're watching horror and also interacting in the world. And thank you, Chauncy. That's such a great point. I barely think about kids when I see them in movies because I'm so much like not interested that I'm like, whatever, kill the child. I'm always like psyched when they're put in the position that the child might die. But that was such a very, very good point. And I need to see Freddy versus Jason, or do I not need to see Freddy versus Jason? I don't. Okay, skip
You're
it.
good.
Okay, great.
Good.
Just listen to new metal and like walk through a Universal maze a little bit.
Okay.
That's all you need.
Oh my gosh. Okay, that's perfect. Yeah, and everybody was discussing. I sent a question out about, is the theme of self-sacrifice or martyrdom a distinctly feminine one? Because that feels like the other side of girl boss. That said, if you're not a girl boss, then you have to sacrifice. And for what? Yes. Yeah. And for who? And I hated Come Play. That Come Play was a movie that made me so angry that I was furious for days about it. It was such a frustrating movie. Do not recommend. Well, we've got about 15 minutes left. So I just kind of want to get into how important representation is or isn't. And I want to talk about focus on genre film. I think the last several years, in conjunction with girl bossism, we've taken the idea of representation in media, which is important to me, and blown it up to like representation in the government, so that like that Kamala Harris is the best possible person that we could have, which I disagree with. But of course the representation is exciting, but that's not, when it doesn't help people that she's representing, then it's not good representation in my opinion. And so I'm interested then in what you think about representation in film, and if there was like a genre film that like really lit you up when you saw it and like changed the way that you thought about what movies could be because of that representation.
Yeah. And like, what does empowerment, what should it look like in genre film too? Like what,
like, do you need empowerment?
Yeah. How is it looking and what should it be looking like? Because we're not really getting the full picture, I think.
I feel like,
I saw your,
sorry.
Oh no, that's okay.
Go ahead.
Why don't you go, Monika, and then Devan, and then I saw BJ's hand.
Oh, I was going to say that authenticity matters. I feel like with the whole like diversity in Hollywood and like films in general is kind of just like a pat on the back of being like, look, we have this black person, but we are still having white writers write their dialogue and their, you know, background. Like that is not what diversity truly is. It also goes to the fact of who are actually creating the films and what does the writers' room look like? Who are the ADs that are getting hired? Because as we all know, in the film industry, nepotism is king, and there's a lot of legacy people that have been like that has been like their business for like their entire family's generation. You know what I mean? Just trying to get into a union is also just like another hurdle. You have to have people vouch for you. You have to have people network for, you know, it's just like all these other things, which is why the authenticity is just not there. And I feel like it's definitely playing into the blatant tokenism that happens in a lot of genre films that we see. Excluding, I mean, like, okay, so we have like Them by who I thought was entirely by Lena Waithe, but wasn't. And the writer's room was comprised of mostly white men. And then we have Jordan Peele's films that, you know, also feature black people, but it's also like on a very heteronormative scale. So there's like chunks of like there's chunks of misrepresentation in the marginalized fields, like. But also I think that like people just think of blackness as a monolith, and they're kind of just like, look, we have black people here, like what else do you want? You know what I mean? And don't really think outside of like that compulsory like white supremacist heteronormativity that we've been discussing. So it's just like, wait, was I supposed to actually say what film I think represents that, or am I just like bitching about how there have been none?
No, everything you're saying is fantastic.
But as I mentioned before, Abby was probably like the one film that I thought was like proactively the best representation of Black femininity, like its complexities, or even Ganja and Hess with Marlene Clark. Like she was like a scream queen of her times, but she also did Shango, which is kind of like a horror movie that also played around with like traditional African spiritual practices. But she's always like had her own complexities that were 100% authentic. And I think that because these were Black helmed films, that is where we got the authenticity. So it's just a matter of just like opening up the resources and busting up like the gatekeeping in order to actually have stories that resonate with other people outside of the mainstream gaze.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Devin,
no, I completely agree, Monika. I was going to say pretty much the same thing, that I obviously representation is super important, but like putting somebody on camera, that's not enough. Like you have to have like who's behind the camera, who's writing the stories, whose voices are we actually hearing? Because if it's just, you know, the same people actually like, you know, leading these films, producing these films, writing them, directing them, then it's not, it's kind of just a veneer, and people kind of, I think, absolving themselves and saying, oh no, this is diverse, look at all this representation, this is great, we did it, but nothing's actually changing. And I don't, this is probably not that good of an example, but I don't know, like it's not a movie. I really love Walking Dead. I don't know if anybody watches Walking Dead, but like I think it's like I love it so much because there are so many different characters, and it's like, I mean, there are queer women, there are Black women, deaf women, like it's just more interesting. It's like a better show because you're getting so many different stories. It's not always like the exact same thing. And also because what they're doing on screen, they also are actually making, like, I mean, again, I'm sure they're not perfect, but like making efforts to actually, you know, work with people behind the camera when they're trying to tell these stories. So they're telling them right. I know, like specifically, they did a couple of episodes that focused on, but just I might be like going off somewhere, so sorry if that's the case. Because I'm like, I love Walking Dead, so I could talk about it forever. But they did a couple episodes where that focused on Connie, who she's a Black deaf woman, and I know like they had consulted with her and a couple other people when they were actually working on it. Like, what would the experience be like? What would people actually? I mean, not hear, because, you know. They essentially like worked with her to actually try to represent what like these different scenarios would have actually felt like, so that the viewers watching would feel what she was feeling, if that makes any sense. And it was like incredibly powerful, and like it was different. It was something I'd never seen before. So like I feel like when they get it right, it's exciting. It's just better.
Yeah, it's really thrilling to be like, oh, great. I mean, I'm bored with, I don't need to keep seeing white women rise to the top. Like, I know there's thousands of stories out there. I want to hear something totally new. So I think that's a really good point. BJ, you had your hand up earlier as well. Oh, you're muted again.
I did it again because it's now weed whacking. We're doing a whole landscaping thing going on today. But in terms of the stuff that is resonating with me, I'm somebody who exists, like my privilege exists on like a dimmer switch, in that like if I'm with my wife, who is a 6'3" trans woman, like that it goes down. If I'm by myself, it goes up, because I exist in the world as a white person, and because like alternative cultures have sort of pushed forward into the norm. This is no longer like an exclusively that's a queer person haircut. I could just be a hipster, who knows? So I can exist through the world in a lot of different spaces. So like what Monika was saying about how there's like these pockets of representation that like one aspect might be super good, but then the other aspect might not be. I find that a lot, where I might find a character who is a woman that I agree with and I see myself in, but it's also like super heteronormative, which I don't fall into. So that gets really complicated. And the place that I've found it the best in all actuality is in a children's program called Craig of the Creek. If none of you are watching it, you all have homework. But Craig of the Creek is an animated show about like kids and like their imagination at the creek. And the writing staff is super diverse, to the point where if they realize that somebody in the writer's room is not seeing themselves in the show, then they will make a character for it. So now we have characters that are like Black girls that are super into like magical girl anime, so she dresses like Sailor Moon all the time. And there is a non-binary character who takes care of like the little siblings in the creek, and they use they them pronouns and explain that to the children. And they have all these really complex friend groups, and the kids are all different sizes and backgrounds, and they come from differing socioeconomic classes, and they all intertwine together, and they're not afraid to highlight where those differences have impact in the games that they can play. Like, oh, we're going to play a game. Everyone bring your own supplies. Okay, well, the rich kids now have like all of this high-tech fancy stuff, and the poorer kids brought cardboard. Screw it. Let's figure it out. Let's figure out how to make these work. And I think that that's so incredible, and I'm so happy that there are kids that are going to watch that show and grow up watching it, because in 10-15 years from now, those are going to be the kids who want to be in writers' rooms, who they're not going to stand for any of this basic shit, which I love. And am I mildly biased that they have a fat lesbian character with green hair? Yeah, maybe a little bit. But she's also
your show, BJ. Did you write the show?
I lost my mind when it got to that episode, because those characters are also like teenagers that were like sneaking in the woods to make out, and they read tarot cards. So the kids were like, they're witches. And rather than like break kayfabe, they're like, yeah, we are witches. Because they're like, we're not going to ruin these kids' fun. Like, I'm obsessed with this show. It's one of those shows where you watch it and you're like, why didn't we do this earlier? Like, this solves so many problems.
Well, it's also amazing that it's a children's program, because that means children are seeing it. And that, I mean, that's why film is, even if many people can write it off as just entertainment, it literally shapes how we move forward as a society. It shapes generations entirely. I mean, and when children, all they're doing is watching TV, what are they consuming? And if they're consuming this, that's amazing, I think, for our growth.
Oh, totally. And like, last thing, I swear, I don't know if any of you are on TikTok or have heard about the latest issue with a band called Tramp Stamps, where, so essentially they, a record company decided, how can I bottle punk rock girl boss energy and turn it into a band? And they basically got these 3 white women who play music, gave them a bunch of Dolls Kill clothing, already strike off that.
Red flag.
Huge red flag already. And then they all got their hair like they have like just enough dark root and then like bright, vibrant hair, and they sing songs that are like pop punk about like I'd rather die than like be with another straight white guy. You're all white. Like, let's okay here. And then what ended up happening is like TikTok was like, this feels inauthentic, and dove very deep into the situation. And it's like, oh, this one's a Disney adult, she's not into punk. This one used to sing country music, also not into punk. And then they would find all of their songs where like one of the songs has a bridge where the girl's talking and she's like, Donald Trump ruined the country. If you're afraid of the dark, it's because you should be. Everyone should have free birth control. Like, it sounds like somebody put like Girlboss through an algorithm, and then they would just like send it to the masses and they're like, this is what people love. And it got rejected immediately because of that lack of authenticity. Everyone was like,
AI generated.
They're like, no, I see right through this shit. Like, no, this isn't okay.
Oh my God. Josie and the Pussycats was right. It was totally ahead of its time.
I wrote an article for the 20th anniversary about that very thing. Like, it was like, happy 20th anniversary. They warned us and we didn't listen.
Everyone should have free birth control, though. I'm with them on that.
That's the thing, is it's like the things they're saying, like, yeah, you're right, but also it's coming from this very inauthentic place,
yeah.
so it gets rejected immediately. So like, am I stoked there's representation of like a tough girl punk band that's saying fuck the patriarchy? Yeah, that's cool. Am I stoked that it's this band? No.
We already have X-Ray Specs.
We're good. Yes, they've been here.
And the Lunatics, like, sorry, Lunatics were there.
Well, I mean, it's like capitalizing off of what people want. We want free birth control. And they're like, ah, yes, industry plant.
How can we make a band about it?
Yeah. That's what people want? Okay, let's make money.
I think what I want to see the most is, I love genre and specifically horror because it's the one that uses empathy as a storytelling tool. It's the one where it's like, I'm going to make you feel what this person on screen feels to feel scared. And like, the thing that's been frustrating is for a very long time, the people writing stories like mine have been people who don't experience my stories, which is frustrating. You know, it's been mostly like men thinking like, what do I feel? And then they write it. But then now, double-edged sword, people are only going to like, you know, Latina women, Black women, queer women, and asking us to tell our stories and only our stories, and we can't tell anyone else's, even though they've been doing this for decades and decades and decades. Like, I can only write about the Latina experience. I can only write about like the immigrant experience or the queer experience, and they have pigeonholed me into this box where it's like, you wanted your representation, now you can only have it, but this is the only story you can tell. And I just want different perspectives behind the camera. I want stories greenlit behind the camera, and they don't necessarily need to be personal, but they're just interesting by changing that gaze and changing the person doing it. Like, the movie that I always bring up as this example where like the original piece of media was awful, and then the new perspective was like something that's interesting that resonated with me, where it's like, I want to be the person behind the camera telling a new version of a story, was American Psycho. Like, if you read American Psycho by Bret Easton Ellis, like,
so bad.
just this weird fantasy. And then Mary Herron and Guinevere Turner take a stab at it, sorry for the pun, and you know, make it this amazing satire on like, you know, masculinity and it becomes this like timeless thing by their perspective, and they're not telling their personal stories, they're not directing women on the screen, but it's a completely different story, and one that I adore because there are women behind the camera and women writing it, and it's something different. And like, while a lot of people's idea of like, oh, we're making progress now is like greenlighting our stories, it's only when we like share our tragedy, it's only when we like, you know, talk about those that have hurt us, and we can't tell any of the other stories that we want to tell.
Yeah, it's very
So well put.
voyeuristic, and it's curating people's stories.
Yeah,
that's what's always happening. And I work at Morgue, and I'm like, I run the office, so everything comes through me. So when I'm sending things to be covered, it's always the same. It's like production companies don't trust women or people of color at all, particularly like Black and Indigenous women, to tell stories, they always have them as subjects and then a white director and writer. And it's like, there's a running joke, like I'll send one to the blog editor and I'll be like, look at this, and I'll circle the name, and it's like, and then the description is so like, you think it's, you know, oh, this could be interesting, and then you look and you're like, fuck. It's like, I can't help it. I can't help but be biased and be like, I don't want to see this motherfucker telling this story. I want to see the names and the people that I know can tell these stories. I don't want to, and again, like you said, it's all like tragedy based. It's like, it's particularly, yeah, with black women and Black lives, like it always has to be this like tragedy, but you know, I mean, there's a reason like in Stephen King movies, like the first victim is a Black person. Like when are we gonna do, what are we doing here? Like what are we doing here, guys? You know, like what? So it's more, for me, it's the gatekeeping. And I'm not saying like DIY film has a lot of reach, but let's be real, like as far as like this girl boss mainstream, it's because these people have been giving shitloads of money and an unlimited budget to tell this fucked up wag-ass story where all these other people are trying to tell this story for real. And until there's a bridge in there, I think people are going to catch on slowly because shit changes, but in the long run, it's people on the ground that are the ones that are not, you know, that are being victimized by, once again, a stereotype. Because if these if this, you know, there are people like this and they think this is empowerment, and the rest of us are going to get fucked over because of it. So it's a huge problem. Okay, now I'm
perfectly
done being mad.
put.
Sorry, y'all.
No, I want you to be mad. Everybody should be mad. It's perfect. And then Chauncy, I wanted to hear from you what your thoughts on representation, or you know, what you are hoping.
I think I echo what others have said about authenticity. There's a few feelings I've had about I think we know, because we've seen in plenty of studies that have been going on, that diversity, when there are, you know, people of color and women women of color and things like that on screen, that these movies actually do just as well, if not better. Money is made. And then there's the question of why doesn't Hollywood listen to that? Well, it goes back to what was said about nepotism, because if you have to start hiring the people behind the scenes who can tell those kind of stories that make money, then suddenly, you know, insert, you know, Josh or Chad or whoever, you know, whatever name, they can't be the CEO of this company anymore. They can't be the person who's calling the shots, because suddenly they're not equipped to to green light the right movies that need to come out and things like that. So there's a push of a false narrative. And I think that's one of the things you have to push back on, the false narrative that these type of movies that are authentic, that aren't just dealing with trauma and things like that, but can deal with trauma, all types of things, can do well. They do well. That's the first thing we have to push against, because they actually do well. There's not a fight necessarily to get people to go watch these films. We know people go watch these films. They know it too. They just don't want to acknowledge it, because they know then they have to hire the right kind of people to be able to tell those kind of stories. And they do not want to do that, because as was said, Monika said it perfectly, which is that there is nepotism. There is legacy. I sometimes look at an up and coming person that comes, I'm like, oh, this person just came from nowhere. I'm so cool. That's so great. And I'm like related to, so I'm like, man, is anybody from
exactly, like the second cousin, and they try to hide it too, right?
They always try to hide it.
And then like as soon as it hits on Twitter, you know, nothing's safe on Twitter. Yes. Like people just go look it up, and it's just like, oh yeah, they're the second cousin to a Rockefeller. You're just like, what the fuck?
Okay, so nobody's just coming from nowhere. So that's the big thing, to push back against that narrative and push back against nepotism, because it's such a thing there. And then, you know, going to the whole thing of authenticity, what was brought up earlier was the question of the that made a big splash, was the series Them. And Lena Waithe. I couldn't stand that series. I got this advanced screener. I sat through all 10 episodes so I could give a full truthful, spoiler-free review. And the the stuff I got thrown at me, because I explained that I'm not against showing trauma on screen. I specifically said that, but people who, hate your argument already are going to say you didn't. But I said, I'm like, it has to be done in a way, I feel like it should be done in a way that doesn't feel exploitative, or that it's like, who's this show for? Is it for Black audiences, for empowerment? Is it for the white audience to teach them something? I don't believe in that, actually, to be honest with you. I think if someone has to watch something to suddenly not become racist, I don't adhere to that. And I'm not for making entertainment that shows my trauma on screen to educate a white person. I think that decentralizes my story and makes it about them. So these were things I was saying. And I think it's important with that representation to dissect it, because there is a certain tiptoeing that happens when there's a Black film or something like that from, because we feel that narrative sometimes. We're like, well, if I didn't like it, but if I say I didn't like it, then, these people use it as an excuse never to make this film again. Or
it's like airing out dirty laundry. That's
airing out dirty laundry.
Like Black conversations.
And I had to make a choice about them, because like, no, this I can't. I have to say it. And the stuff that was thrown at me, the misogyny, all types of stuff. People are like, I don't know if I could believe you with your blonde hair. I'm like, I'm sorry. I didn't know the hair color I picked this week meant that I'm not Black anymore. Because I wanted to question the representation of, and I'm being told this is history. You better learn your history, girl. And I'm just like, I know my history. I also know that this is bullshit. And I also know this is someone got to check. All right. Don't act like this is educational. Someone got to check to use your trauma and make $1 off of it. And 9 out of 10 of those directors were white men.
In the writer's room, half of them were all white men. Lena Waithe only wrote like 1 episode.
Exactly.
And that was the issue. And also just so like being a part of like Amazon too, which is just like a whole nother level. It's just like, fuck that. But yeah, like they literally just used her as like a talking point to be like, this is like another Black horror film because we're just gonna like ride this coat wave, and it's just like, literally, yeah, people got paid in order to see that. And like there is a specific way of showcasing trauma that it will not like trigger these like repulsive responses like within you. Like,
and who does it benefit? Who does it benefit for something like that? And that was my thing. I'm like, I want to hear my stories, but I also want to be just as afraid of a ghost. I don't want the ghost to call me the N-word. It doesn't have to call me the N-word for me to be in a haunted house. I just want to be in a haunted house. I don't think that has to happen. So I just want some authenticity. I just want to be able to do other things in my genre that I love. That's all.
That's totally fucking fair.
You win this roundtable, Chauncy. I haven't laughed that hard in a week. I'm crying now. I had a similar feeling earlier this week because the promising. I mean, I don't begrudge any woman from liking Promising Young Woman. I don't want to hear from men on it at all, but it's not for me. And I feel like there's been so many narratives lately that are rape revenge, but not like the type of rape revenge movies I want to see. And it's always like men writing it or weighing in on it. And I was like, I said I just wanted to see a haunted house movie and not have the ghost be rape. Because I just feel like it's always like the monster is also rape. Like, what is that? All right, amazing. Well, are there any lost thoughts? Well, so many, I'm sure. Are there any last thoughts that anybody wants to chime in on, or anything that just popped into your head that will frustrate you if you don't say it? Wow, did we solve this issue?
I feel like if you send me an email being like, you should check out this film, it's Girlboss, it's going in the trash.
Yeah.
So you know.
You'll like it because you're a lady.
I do think I think it's important, like right now, that we like even just sitting here together, I think a big part of fucking up that narrative is boosting each other too. And I know people say that all the time, and like they're like, we gotta girl boss, we gotta, no. But really, like, even if we don't necessarily agree on everything, I think putting more opinions into the ether, because everybody has their own network of people that they know, and I think breaking down the need and the want, even the curiosity, because we know often when we see like a trailer, you're like, I know what I'm getting into here. And I mean, a lot of you are critics. I'm not a critic, so I don't have to watch it. I can be like 5 minutes, I'll be like, pink, you know? So thank you for your work, honestly. But I think that's part of it, is being able to expose other narratives as well. So that's my girl boss moment right now.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think that being able to boost each other's voices, even when we have different perspectives, is like the biggest thing, because something we talked about, BJ and I were in the Women in Horror roundtable a little bit ago, and what we talked about was how it can often feel like there's only room for one of us. But and that's one of the most important parts about boosting each other's voices, is carving out our own space and carving out room for our voices when people at, you know, the top of the food chain won't do it for us. And being able to create space for our opinions to be heard is, I think, the most important thing, because people will try and make it seem as though there's only room for one woman, one Black person, one queer person, and that's just not the case. And we're stronger together. We're stronger together. And, you know, if there's any girl boss Pinterest quote out there that I agree with, it is that one. You know, being
The
able
rising
to
tide lifts all boats.
Yeah.
Well, and I think with boosting each other's opinions, and this is mostly for white women, is to know when to be quiet and to step back, and to also and to be able to be wrong with grace, and to be called out with grace, and to have the space, make yourself a person who can be told they're wrong, and to have it. And when I say be okay with being wrong, not just like, fuck it, I say what I want, who cares if I'm wrong, but more like, oh, okay, I'm wrong. Okay, here's how my action plan for fixing it, and then not doing that again. So I mean, being okay with, like, you know, not having a complete and utter public meltdown about it.
Going instant defensive.
Yes, exactly. Because I think we are seeing, you know, people like to talk about the horror community being very small, or just using the word community in general as if like everybody who likes horror online, again, is a monolith and we're all interested in the same things. And I think that, you know, especially this week, if you're online, there's definitely a lot of issues kind of came up with that as well. And to remember that there are people who are trying to work independently of the system, and there are people who are trying to work within the system. And I think we can try to get along with each other. And I think it'd be great if they would try to boost us. I'm sure we're welcome to, you know, for them all the time. But I think it's difficult as independent, like DIY creators who are like, yeah, we're all great at boosting each other. I think it's difficult when we're coming up against larger voices who don't want to boost us.
And I advocate a concierge system where if someone comes at one of us, like if somebody comes at Monika with a stupid question, I'm like, send it to me.
Oh, that's smart.
Send it to me.
Yeah.
Send
Yeah,
it to
well,
me.
I'll put myself out there as like anybody harassing any Black women, any women of color, or just stupid questions that they're trying to have you educate them on. I love telling people why they're wrong about something. Yeah.
Over there. Send it over there if you don't want to do.
Yeah, give everybody my email. I'll deal with them.
Trust me. Concierge. Right over here.
That's so smart, Mariam. I love that. As DIY creators, I think it's hard. Sometimes I get down because I'm like, I believe in myself and my work and my collective, but I just like, is anyone ever going to see it? How could we bust through, at least so that we can get new stories out to people? You have to work within the system a little bit. I don't know. Real quick, I just want to hear independent creators, like what you think about trying to bust into the system, or not at all.
Send me your stuff.
Oh, okay, great.
Blog. You know what I mean? Like, there's somebody, I mean, that's the only real, I got the job by virtue of knowing somebody, again, like a friendship. And I always welcome any, you know, anything to put on the blog to like Actually, I should do interviews with everybody here. But you know, I do like a lot of technical aspects of it, so I'm not as involved because I'm busy with that. But you know, I definitely like reach out to people, and any person that's in a position of power, like I feel like those people are always like managing expectations. If you're like, hey, hey, will you put this on your blog, or you put this or do that? Like that's totally reasonable if people don't want to do it. But I think it's also, if you do have any sort of privilege or position that you can have access to those people, you have to do something with it. I really think that. And if you're like myself particularly, I was asked to join this. There's a film festival here called Blood in the Snow, and it's all Canadian horror. And we're doing like a bridge program where it's not a mentorship program. I fucking hate that word, but it's a bridge program where we put like folks of color, like filmmakers, horror filmmakers, directly in contact with people that are producers and stuff. Because we have that bridge, like not me personally, but that organization, I was like, let's do this, you know? So now that's, you know, it's literally a direct, and we have a support system. Like I have people that are like, that I'm contacting in the program that I'm like, how was your day? How did it go? Do you feel comfortable? Was this person receptive? Do you need another person you want to talk to that's like an industry lead? What are you most interested in? Like, it's not just like throwing someone out in the wilderness and being like, do it for yourself. You know, that's not the way that shit works. Because if that was the way that shit works, like there would be girl bosses, right? Of all colors, and it's bullshit. It's not pull yourself up by your bootstraps. It's literally, you have to put that shit in the hands of other people, and you have to provide the support, and not the support you think people need. You have to ask people what they need. And that's my biggest problem with stuff like this, is that people are like, I know what you need. I know what people need. It's like, no, you don't know shit. Like, you have to ask people what they want. And if you're extending this hand of help, folks, like, it's you know, it's about motivation, right? And sorry, I'm getting off on a tangent about like my own worldview about that shit, but you know, when it comes down to well, that shit comes to light. I don't care who you are in this day and age now. If you have a disingenuous reason, like all these other fucking movies that like have a poster person to be like, look at our diversity, your shit will be found out, period. And the only reason people will work with you is because you have money and you have connections. And fine, you know, I don't begrudge anyone for being like, fuck yeah, give me that cash, let's do this, you know, because sometimes that's what people do. But it's up to us unfortunately, it's up to us to solely make those networks so people have access without compromising who they are and what they believe in, even in this framework. Okay, I went on a tangent. Sorry, I talked too much. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just saying, great job, Mariam. I appreciated it. Thank you. Who was it, Monika or Vanessa?
I was just going to add to, like, you know, we're fortunate to live in like such a technological age that I think it's like super important for us to maintain the niche like groups that we do have, because if anything, this panel would not have happened if we did not network in some form of way, you know what I mean? And I think being able to broadcast that loudly, like, yes, I represent this, and like these are the people that I support, that could be such an opening to other aspiring filmmakers, writers, whatever, that come from similar backgrounds, who are just trying to navigate and find their safe space online. Because I also firmly believe that safe space online is something that's a bit more tangible, because block buttons exist and they're amazing, and I wish I had a real life block button that would be tight. That's probably like some Black Mirror shit, like, in the future. But you know, so I think that like by amplifying like each other's like voices in our work and like sharing each other's work, like we'll be able to like make some steam. And like, you know, I feel like mutual aid is pretty much just like poor people like exchanging money like within our own group. And I feel like that's pretty much the MO for independent creatives, right? Like, we are our own autonomous, sustainable system, and I think that we can make it even more sustainable by having further lines of transparency, accountability, and visibility. It's like very, you know, and all of that takes work, but I feel like we're all contributing towards that, and we should just like keep pushing it further and further.
Yes, well put. Vanessa, did you have something you wanted to say? Did I make that up?
Yeah, no, I was trying to think of like, if I had one thing I wanted to say, and I think mostly it's just we've all been like inside for a year, so like what happens on social media feels like it's more law. But I think as independent creators, it's really easy to hold yourself up to like the successes of what like white men receive and like talk about, and you know, kind of like lessen our own work and our own strengths, because you know we're told not to like have that like confidence or pride in our work. But also a lot of like the like goalposts for them and like the big wins that they like talk about are like pretty hollow. Like I know I was like in my feels a while back because I didn't have representation, but then a lot of like the men that I know that have representation have booked nothing in the year, and they're basically giving like 15% of like none of the jobs that they're giving to a dude that doesn't work for them anyway. And in that same amount of time, I like booked myself like 100 episodes of television, and like I was making me feel bad and holding it to like what their like quote unquote wins were. And like when I was invited to the same seats at the table to like talk about the stuff that we like know, I kept talking myself out of like, you know, like, oh, I don't actually know that much about that, when I do, just because the virtue of them being louder. And so a lot of the times it has to be you telling yourself that you are good at what you do, and you like, you know, you set your own measures of success, because like their goalposts are not the same as yours. The table that they've built that they won't let you have a seat at, like I don't even want a seat at that table anyway, because it's just empty victories. Like I like my standards I am setting for me. And I think like at the end of the day, if you are meeting your own standards, like who the fuck cares about whatever they're talking about, and whatever they're saying is like their big win of the day.
I think that's a massive point, because that's something I've wrestled with too, is I've noticed more and more as I've gotten older, as time's gone on, as I've had an entire year to live in my head. You know, I've been noticing all the ways in which I wasn't even advocating for myself, because I was already conditioned to assume that I wasn't like competent. You know, being on a set where I didn't even consider my opinion to be something worthy to even bring up, and kind of victimizing myself and being like, why aren't they asking me? Why aren't they doing it? When I was, which is maybe also true, but that I wasn't even putting myself out there, because I just didn't think they would, you know, they're not asking, and then I'm not, you know, myself into the conversation, because I already think that, you know, something in me just was naturally not doing it. And being able to find ways to be your own advocate is so important, especially in, you know, a structure in a world that's not going to do it for us, and has unfortunately taught us to not advocate for ourselves. It's really important.
Yeah, really well put. BJ, did you have a contribution?
Yeah, the one thing that I wanted to add is I'm a firm believer in the take space, make space mindset of you have to be able to take that space, so that you don't have those moments of self-doubt where you think I don't deserve to be here, or I'm not competent, or my voice isn't important. Like you need to be able to take that space, but at the same time, we also need to be able to make space for other people, in the sense that like I am fully aware that I get offered a lot of privileges for a number of reasons, either because it's, oh, I'm white, therefore I'm safe, here's an opportunity, or if it is like a checkbox opportunity of we needed another queer girl and you're here. It's important to be aware of those things, and to know like, is this a moment where I'm taking up someone else's space and I need to make space for them? Or is this an instance where this is space that, yeah, I do work well in, and this is a situation where I can speak on this. And I think especially for white people, we have to be able to get used to sitting with that discomfort of admitting when it's not your space to take up, when you do need to step aside and leave that space for someone else. And I think that goes back to and what we had mentioned that we talked about in the last roundtable of feeling like there's only room for one, and that's not always true. Like, that's not true. There's always room for more people. And we also, though, have to be mindful of, in some situations, though, even if there is that one spot, we might not be the best person for that job. We might not be the best person to speak on a situation. And I think for so long, white creators thought like, no, their voice was law. And because of things like the internet and the communities that we've built, we are finally admitting, like, and by we, I say some, are finally admitting like, no, like, this isn't my space to talk on this. Like, I also think there's this weird double standard for women, especially in genre spaces, where we constantly feel like we have to prove ourselves. So if somebody asks us a question, we don't want to admit that we don't know something, because then like all our credibility goes out the window.
Gotcha.
And then now they don't want to talk to us about whatever. But there are some situations where we have to be like, hey, guess what? I'm not super educated on this topic. I don't know the answer to that question. Can I direct you to somebody else who may be a better fit for this? But we have to silence those impulses that I think exist within anybody who has, you know, any form of privilege, and it's necessary. And I'm not going to say like, oh, it's hard. Like, it's really not hard. It's necessary. People just don't want to do it. So if there's one thing that I want to present, it's the take space, but make space. And that is,
I love that. Take space, make space. I hadn't heard that before.
I want to say though about that is, the only caution I would say as being a person that's obviously like in between different worlds, like I've often been like, people ask me a question about something and I'm like, well, I'm not of that culture, so I don't know. So take a look at this. And then I'll see people ask the question to that person and I'm like, no, dumbass, that's not what I meant. I meant, watch the blog, watch the video, they'll explain something. And then, so this is something I learned a long time ago. So I have to be like, you know what? We could talk about this all day long. Let's look at this stuff. We even give people a reading list at Audre's Revenge. Like, and come back to me. You know, you have to ask permission. You know, and even then, like, there's a time, I don't know, I just feel like people have lost that, the language of knowing the cues, you know? It's much easier in person. If shit goes down and you're with your friend, you can tell by the body language, especially if somebody you really know, you know, when to intervene, and how to intervene. I think that's part of it too. And I think people think like bystander intervention is something that just takes place in a physical realm, but it happens online, it happens in the horror world, it happens in all those places as well. And I think people need to pay more attention. And I do think it is hard for white women because they aren't in those spaces very often. And when they aren't, it's in a space like this where we're all open and talking and people are sharing their truths and shit that they don't have to, but they do, you know, because we're here comfortable talking about this stuff. But it's, yeah, I think it's, I don't know really where I'm going with this, but I'm just saying, like, I just worry that there's a lot of rhetoric right now about people being like, you know, and this is not like I agree, like, we're all in different levels of privilege, right? But there's a lot of rhetoric now, and again, I don't know all of you, but I'm sure you've experienced all of this outside of here, where people know what to say, but they don't know what to do. You know? They'll say everything you want to hear, but they don't know what to do with it. Yeah. And that's when there's a schism that happens, and then all of a sudden you see somebody like with all this shit with like Richard Stanley. You know, people will be like, yeah, that's fucked up. And then they'll like some of his posts. And I'm like, didn't you just say this thing? Like, what are you doing? Like, you think we don't see this shit? Like, of course we see it. That thing with the nightmare on, all the nightmare on Fear Street and Film Street, and that bullshit that happened with those white creators, like coming at all these other like bloggers, like really foul. And I'm like, who do you think you're talking to? Like, I think people just need to do their homework.
Another Audre Lorde quote is, because you know it doesn't mean you live it, which is like been very evident. People have just been exposing themselves like subconsciously, and that's literally, pay attention to those red flags, y'all. I'm just saying, observe and move forward. because I think that's like what a lot of adage, like it's totally okay to know the buzzwords. It's totally okay to know the right hashtags and like all the things that you want to market yourself as being, and like trying to tap into that demographic, but like your actions will speak louder than words, and you know, you will be held accountable for it, because that's the age that we live in, and I personally am for it.
I was just going to say, in particular to the whole thing of the horror community, I kind of have a thing with that, you know, because of the fact that it's like there is gatekeeping. There is some people who say, oh yeah, we dropped that person. Then you look at their website and it's like, well, there's a reason why you had that person in the first place, probably because you might have adhered to some of the stuff they were about, which was excluding, you know, people of color. But I would also say, like, when we highlight people, like, I love this panel. I think this panel is so great. And it's just, you know, it's been such a, you know, a breath of fresh air to have this conversation about something with a, you know, diverse group of, you know, people. And in that same token, you know, when Black History Month comes up, and people are always reaching out to Black creators to now talk about stuff. Hey guys, it's Black History Month. Can you come on to talk about this thing? Which I don't mind doing. I'm all about it. You know what I mean? Let's talk about it. But then when it gets to another topic, suddenly the panel goes back to being all white. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And it's sometimes it's people with the best intentions, of course, but it's like you kind of have to unpack why people might do that, right? Like, what is it about when Black History Month, or we're talking about a Black topic, that you go after these, you know, create women of color, Black women in particular, and now it's like, yeah, can you come on, and then it's like we see the other events or something like that, and it's now you're just talking about a general topic, and suddenly no one else is on the panel or in the event or something like that. It's like, it's those kind of things where it's like, don't just, I mean, yes, we want to, you know, have that voice, but it's like, we can talk about other stuff too. Like, this is why I love this topic. You know what I mean? It's like, hey, girl, well, I'm getting reached out to talk about something in general. That's great. But it's so weird to me, because I'm like, I know so much other stuff. You don't just have to, you know, get contacted for particularly the Black struggle, which is, you know, I can talk about that all day, every day, but it's also like, you know, if you're going to talk about other topics, it's also acknowledging that if you do believe that we are full-fledged creators and things like that, that you don't just put us in a box, you know, when it's time to, you know, tout us out around Black history or something.
It's what Vanessa was saying. Yeah, it's like Vanessa was saying about how when it comes to wanting to create your own work, you want to write about, you want to tell stories about all kinds of different people and things, and not always have it be about your own lived experience, whether it's good or whether it's trauma. Well, everyone, you were amazing and even smarter than I had anticipated. And I already thought you were going to be geniuses. So thank you so much for all of this. It was really interesting. I took 5 pages of notes.